So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining. For those who don't know me, my name is Micallef. I'm the CEO of MaritimeMT. Is part of Marmed project. So Marmed is represent Maritime Cluster Management Education Development, and this is an Erasmus funded project by the European. And we've been at this project for almost 2 years now, and it's nearing its completion. Part of the these and the things that we have to do is outreach and also making sure that we disseminate the information from this project in terms of the blue economy efforts that we're doing. So in terms of Marmed, we're a number of partners. The partners are listed in the slide. And we got together to come up with gaps that maritime cluster managers. So when it comes to maritime clusters, we're speaking of organizations that get together and support the blue economy and maritime organizations in respective countries. So the closest to a maritime cluster that we have, to a blue economy cluster that we have, which is a maritime cluster, is Malta Maritime Forum, and we also have a representative, the CEO of the MMF, which is Mr. Kevin Borch. So we are here obviously as a webinar. We decided to tackle let's skip the slide. To tackle blue economy consultations. So this is the agenda for today. We'll give you a brief update of the project. We'll keep it very brief, don't worry. And then we have our keynote speaker, which is Mr. Karmenu, has come to this webinar as a representative from the Ministry for Transport, Infrastructure and Projects. Obviously, they are the most involved in consultation and encompass a number of a presentation from an area representative, Ms. Maritime as well. Mr. Kevin will also do an intervention in terms of the efforts that are being done by the Maritime Cluster in Malta, which is the Malta Maritime Forum, with regards to consultations. And then Capt. Which is the Chief Officer, Maritime Affairs Authority for Transport. He will also be discussing on what we have and also his views on the area. We hope we get time left to handle Q&A. However, I do ask you to use the chat available. So someone said that I have a problem with I just ask you all to remain on mute, because that way it will be easier for my sound. It will not. So we'll finish with a Q&A session, but I do ask you to pose any questions in the chat, and as we go along, even after each and every presentation, we can also pose some questions there and then. Okay, so I leave it up to Laura. Captain Laura is our course content manager and lecturer. She is our main person when it comes to Marmed project. She's been involved at the different levels.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Can you please just confirm that you can hear me well? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Please change the next slide. Thank you. As Pauline said, Marmed is an Erasmus Plus project. It had started on 31st December of 2022, and it is about to be finalized by the end of this year. Next slide, please. There are 7 partners involved in the project. There are also 3 associated partners, one of which comes from the cluster in Tunisia. We have 5 maritime clusters involved and also 3 training and research organizations, MaritimeMT being one of these training organizations. Next slide, please. So the project aim. The sole aim of this project is to build identify skill gaps of maritime clusters that are in the industry at the moment and address those skill gaps through training. The idea is to increase the competitiveness of these maritime clusters within the Mediterranean area. Next slide, please. The project is envisaged over 5 work packages. The first work package being the project management, overseeing everything. Then we have work package 2, which is referring to the skill gaps analysis. This was spearheaded by Cluster Big of Italy. The idea here was to do research, one-to-one interviews, surveys with managers that are working in blue economy clusters as we speak. From the skill gaps analysis, then we jump to work package 3, where the leader Metropolitan College of Greece designed a curriculum based on these gaps. And then work package 4 is where MaritimeMT comes in, is where we are piloting this training designed by work package 3 in collaboration also with all the partners. Work package 5 involves dissemination activities. This is one of the dissemination activities. We have webinars carried out by all the partners involved. There is also some multiplication events coming up at the end of the year. This is all to disseminate what work on this project has been carried out and the effectiveness of that work. Next slide, please. So, expected results. So, as you can see, the expected results are to get a comprehensive gap analysis on the upskilling and reskilling needs of the Mediterranean maritime clusters, and to create innovative training models, also to enhance the capacity building of blue cluster managers, to have innovative, accessible, and transferable learning approach for a more resilient, sustainable, and innovative blue economy path. And finally, to set recommendations for blue cluster managers training, capacity building addressed to all actors of the blue economy ecosystem. Thank you. Next slide. So what about the pilot training? Right now we are in the phase of almost ending the pilot training. This consisted, as you can see on the slide, of 40 hours e-learning training, 16 hours of a study visit, and 19 hours of online live discussions. Next slide. So the e-learning training, that means the 40 hours of self-paced e-learning curriculum, was designed on the skill gaps analysis, which was carried out in work package 2. 4 modules came out of this. So module 1, as you can see, was a basic introduction to different blue economy sectors. There was a need for soft skills, for managerial and technical skills, and finally, for in-depth policy knowledge. There is also currently being translations to Portuguese, Italian, and Greek language. So next phase was the study visit, the 16-hour study visit. Next slide. For the pilot training, the study visit was carried out in Trieste between 13 to 14 June. We had 20 participants coming from Italy, Portugal, Greece, and Malta, and we had reached gender parity. Next, please. So the participants, 10 of these were already working in a maritime cluster at the time, and 10 of them aspired to be maritime cluster managers. I think these were the people that were appropriate to give feedback on the curriculum which we created. Next, please. So I won't go in detail onto the agenda of the study visit, but on the first day, The participants had a visit to the port of Trieste. There was also a conference on blue economy, hydrogen, green shipping, and European integration. They also had the experience of a tugboat. They had crossed Trieste port by a tugboat. Next slide. Then they all met at the urban center, and they had a conference over there on the best practices of startups and clusters. Next. On the next day, on 14 June, they had a lecture by Leonardo Manzari, who forms part of the WestMed initiative. They also had time for some networking in Miramare Park. And before lunch, they had a roundtable from different maritime cluster representatives, which I'm sure was fruitful with lots of insights. Finally, they had one lecture on EU Green Deals and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Next, please. So value added. There were also additional participants for these lectures and activities, which enhanced the networking events. There was also the presence of the Tunisian maritime cluster, which brought a new perspective to the southern side, let's say, of the Mediterranean. And they also had networking opportunities with other participants from the OGS, which is one of the partners at Training Institute. Next, please. So finally, the study visit was a let's say, a successful event. Next, please. And finally, the phase of the pilot training ends with 19 hours of online live discussions. Next. So these 19 hours have been split into 8 sessions and are currently in progress. Today, there was session number 4, so we are halfway there. So there was session number 4, so we are halfway there. These sessions have been created on different sectors of the blue economy. So we had the commercial shipping, the tourism industry, we have fishing industries, we had Earth observations. So we try to tackle different aspects. Experts from the industries were enrolled to design case studies to enhance knowledge of our participants and also to create a discussion atmosphere, to try to get them to think critically and also come up with novel ideas and solutions for the industry. So this is the final update on the Marmed project. We are now in the final, let's say, curve of it, and we hope to make it a success. Thank you from my side. That is it.
Thank you so much, Laura. I hope you got a taste of what we've been through. So I've also been the one to go to the Trieste study visit, and it was very interesting. I actually took something with me that I want to share with everyone. It's something very basic. But when we say that if we don't take care of our sustainability, the world will cease to exist, it's not the world that will cease to exist, but humans on it. So the world has lived without humans for billions of years, and it will continue to live without humans for billions of years. If we don't take care of it, we're actually killing humanity and not the world. So that's something that I took from it, and I wanted to share with you because it's something very simple. So when we speak of the world killing the planet, it's not killing the planet, it's actually killing humanity to be able to give them the right to be able to live on the planet. So yes, thank you so much, Laura. I mean, she has been putting a lot of efforts and work into this project, and it's been very interesting as well. So now we move on to the other thing on our agenda, and that's how Malta fits in the blue economy policy. The blue economy is a big word. It's let's say it's a bombastic word that not many people necessarily have the common definition of the blue economy. And when it comes to implementing policy and when it comes to policy in general in terms of blue economy, there are three major challenges. Okay, so there's data availability and knowledge gaps. So when it comes to formulating policies, we need data on marine ecosystems, pollution levels, and economic impacts. So one of the biggest challenges is lack of data. I am aware that even with other policies, there is also a challenge in terms of data, but in this case, it makes it even more difficult to assess the state of the marine environment and the effectiveness of the interventions. In terms of the other challenge, it's stakeholder engagement. I don't know how many times we receive emails as industry players, and we don't necessarily understand what needs to be done from us, and we ignore. And then when the legislation is implemented, then everyone is saying, this is affecting me. So yes, how are engaging a wide range of stakeholders, including industries, including environmental groups. It's critical when we're formulating policies, okay? And the challenge lies in ensuring that all voices are heard. And the last but not least is the balance between the economic growth and environmental sustainability. So even though we need to tick the box of ensuring certain deadlines are being reached in terms of sustainability, how is that impacting our economy? And how is that affecting our businesses? And obviously, we still need to make it work in terms of our businesses and employing people in general. So with that, I invite our first speaker, which is our keynote speaker, Mr. Karmenu Vella, the former EU Commissioner for the Environment, Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. Mr. Vella comes with a lot of information and a lot of knowledge that he can share with us. But I will pose the initial questions so that we start his presentation. So one of the most important tools to mitigate these challenges is consultation documents. It is what regulators deem necessary during the process of making policy changes. So what process is the EU adopting and how is this affecting Malta? How does Malta fare with regards to consultations within the blue economy? And once a policy is set at EU level, can Malta negotiate the terms? Do we have any influence, any power to influence change? Over to you, Mr. Vella.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and a very good afternoon to all. As you mentioned, I will be looking very briefly, because this is a very broad subject, very briefly at the policies for the blue economy in Malta. For obvious reasons, you cannot isolate Malta when it comes to the blue economy, so we have to look at other factors, external factors as well, influencing policies in Malta. I think discussions about the blue economy are very timely because the blue economy has already started to grow at a very, very fast pace. In fact, it's growing much faster than the global economy. When it comes to planning, future planning for the blue economy, I think it is very safe to say that we are well advanced when it comes to maritime spatial planning and integrated maritime policies. And I believe that so far, at least in Malta, but also elsewhere, this is the closest that we are to blue economy policies. I have to make 2 points. The first point is that the blue economy is multi-sectorial. The blue economy consists of an a cumulative effort of other sectors. Some of them are marine-based, others are land-based, like ports and shipyards and so on. Some depend on the marine aspect, others have a maritime aspect. And because of this multi-sectorialism, it is almost impossible to come up with a one-size-fits-all policy. And the second point is that many of the blue economy sectors are regulated not at national levels, but some of them at regional levels, some at EU levels. at UN and global levels. And most of these blue economy sectors, they have their own sector-specific policies and sector-specific regulations. Malta, I said Malta cannot be looked at in isolation because very much of what is happening in Malta is influenced by what the EU regulates and by the EU directives and by EU policies. In fact, what happens normally in most of the blue economy sectors is that first the EU regulates and Malta is part of that process, but then after a decision is taken at EU level, Malta has then to transpose those EU regulations, and after transposition, then at a national level, Malta has got to start planning the implementation process, implementation strategies, measures to achieve the objectives agreed upon in the European Union. And I will give 3 different examples of this. Let me start with shipping. Shipping is a global activity, global maritime activity. It is regulated nationally. For example, in Malta, we have the shipping register. It is regulated by EU rules, regulations, and directives, such as the EU ETS directive, most recently, the sulfur directive. It is regulated by IMO regulations, MARPOL, UNCLOS, and so on. I'm sure that Captain David would know more on this than me. So again, what we decide, what we come up with in terms of policies for shipping is very, very much influenced by all these external factors. Then we come for fisheries and aquaculture. Again, fisheries is an EU competence. It's not a member state competence. So the EU regulates fisheries through the common fisheries policy. Then at a regional level, Malta is also part of the GFCM, the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean. For some species like swordfish and tuna, then we are subject to ICCAT, the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna. And obviously, our national fisheries plans are subject to these regulatory frameworks. I mentioned fisheries and aquaculture. Aquaculture is different because aquaculture is subject to a number of international and European standards, mostly European standards. So with regards to aquaculture, Malta has to come up with its own policy without any intervention from the EU or elsewhere. The third example that I wanted to bring is coastal tourism. Coastal tourism is considered as a sector of the blue economy, and it is totally a member state competence. So there again, when it comes to tourism, and tourism in Malta is 99.9% coastal. When it comes to planning and coming up with policies for coastal tourism, it is from A to Z a national exercise, a national policy. When it comes to consultations, we have the government through the Malta Tourism Authority dealing and consulting with most or all of the tourism stakeholders and holding quarterly meetings to monitor results. I think the key word in today's discussion, one of the key words, is the issue of consultation. And in my opinion, there is consultation taking place. Let's start with the consultation at the Commission level, because in most of the sectors where the Commission has got the competency, obviously the first proposals come up from the Commission. And the Commission would have already had a number of consultation processes at the international representatives of the sector. So when we talk about the ship owners, obviously the Commission is talk to the representatives of the European and the international ship owners. In ship MISA, we have MISA, a local MISA, but then again, the Commission would not consult our local national MISA, it would consult the international arm. Obviously, when it comes to discussions and approval at Commission level, the Commission presents its proposals to Council and to the European Parliament, because at the end of the day, the decisions are taken by the co-legislators, by the Council and the Parliament. And obviously, this is where the Maltese government gives its contribution. The Malta government gives its contribution at the Council level, but then we have Maltese MEPs who give their contribution in Parliament. Obviously, Maltese stakeholders are consulted normally either by the government or even some MEPs. They take the initiative to discuss with some Maltese stakeholders as well. So the final position is then taken by the co-legislators. I have to say that the final positions of the co-legislators is not always as we would want it to be, but that is EU. Very often our communications are included in the discussions, and they are even taken into consideration as well. On a national level, consultations by governments, for example, in Malta, the first consultations are taking place for the Malta side to take Malta's position in Council and in Parliament. That is the early stage of the policy setting. But more importantly, after the Malta government transposes the directives into our national regulatory framework, then another consultation takes place. And in my opinion, this is the most important part of the process, the consultation on coming up with the measures, implementation measures for what has been agreed upon in terms of policies in the European Union. Obviously, I'm not referring to Malta, but at times you have member states gold plating the directives issued by the EU. There might be some, mostly northern countries at times, they go even beyond what the EU directives are. Quite recently, I think some 2 months ago, and Kevin would correct me in this, the Ministry, MTIP, the Ministry for Transport, has initiated a series of stakeholder consultation to discuss specifically any directives which are on the back burner in the EU or which are going to be proposed by the Commission. A number of Maltese policies, as I said, are influenced by external international policies. I could briefly mention, for example, we have the EU Ocean Governance Strategy, which was set and launched in 2015. Obviously, we have policies like the Barcelona Convention for Cleaner Seas. I already mentioned IMO, the EU trade and the single market policies. Laura mentioned before me the UN Sustainable Development Goals, UNCLOS. We have the UN SDGs and other policies, international policies that we have to abide with, and we have to make certain that our national policies are totally in line with these external and international policies. Obviously, there are to make the blue economy possible, the European Union is taking a dual approach. The first approach concerns traditional sectors like fisheries, aquaculture, maritime transport, tourism, ports, and shipbuildings. And the approach towards traditional sectors is that they must reduce their environmental and climate impact in order for the traditional blue economy sectors to contribute towards the European Green Deal. The second approach is the approach towards the emerging blue economy sectors, sectors like ocean energy, biotechnology, algae production, restoration of the ecosystems. And the European Union also promotes the idea that any investment coming from member states has got to be invested in sustainable and innovative solutions in order to contribute to the sustainable economic growth of the EU. The Commission continues to create the conditions for a sustainable blue economy, and that's where perhaps the member states, including Malta, we could draw down a number of best practices proposed by the EU. The EU is always promoting the right policies. The EU is pushing financing of the blue economy in conjunction with the European Investment Bank, the European Investment Fund, and so on. The EU is also contributing towards the implementation of blue economy policies through the EMFAF, which is the European Maritime, Fisheries and Aquacultural Fund, which was previously meant for fisheries, but now through the Blue Invest Fund in the EMFAF, the blue economy is also included. Obviously, the EU is also encouraging member states to include as much as possible blue economy projects in their national programs. With regards to research and development, the EU has dedicated a mission specifically on oceans in its Horizon Europe. So there's a lot going on. Obviously, Malta also participates in a number of regional policies. So apart from global UN SDGs and so on, and European policies, we are also part and parcel of the WestMed, the European Union, the Union for the Mediterranean, the GFCM, and so on. And as part of these regional organizations, we also have to make certain that our policies are also in sync with these. That was a very brief idea, at least to understand that we, as Malta, we cannot say we are masters of our own policies. Why? Because we are part of global organizations, regional and European organizations as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vella. That was very interesting. There's a lot going on, clearly, and many people might not really know what actually the efforts are being done. So thank you for that. So we'll keep the questions for a bit later. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Ms. Maritzo. She comes from the Environment and Resources Authority. She's a team manager, and yes, I'll leave it up to her to explain the efforts ERA do with this regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well because the internet connection might not be that good. Okay, so please let me know if I'm breaking up. So obviously the environment is an important component of blue economy. We need to enable growth of economic sectors, but at the same time, we also need to look at the preservation of the marine environment. And in line with the communication from the European Union on blue economy, it is clear that the environment and the economy are intrinsically linked. The economic sectors rely and depend on the marine environment, and in Malta, it's a particular case where we have a lot of economic sectors which are dependent on the marine environment. They require a healthy marine environment. For example, in particular, water quality is a very important aspect for these maritime sectors, but at the same time, they would be also exerting some kind of pressures on the marine environment, which we would need to address. Next slide, please. So the main environmental considerations in blue economy, also in relation to the policy processes that are ongoing on this aspect, is climate neutrality in terms of the carbon footprint of the economic sectors, zero pollution objectives, which is at EU level, there's a zero pollution action plan to reduce pollution, especially also, not especially, also in the marine environment, but also in other matrices such as air. The circular economy and the prevention of waste, and here we specifically look also at marine litter and the associated problems with plastics. We also look at biodiversity conservation and protection, okay, because although obviously this is an important part of the marine environment. And another aspect is improvement in knowledge. I mean, we need to improve our knowledge, also, not just on the economic sectors themselves and how they affect the marine environment, but also on the marine environment itself and the status, and which I will talk about later. It will be a very brief presentation, so I won't take long. Now, in terms of consultations, yes, we as AIRA, we are consulted on blue economy processes, and we are consulted on roadmaps, for example, that are undertaken by the Union for the Mediterranean, ministerial declarations on initiatives which are related to blue economy, and also on the processes of sustainable blue economy in Malta. So we are generally kept in the loop of the policy processes on blue economy. And the reason for that is that we need to ensure that all these processes are aligned also with the environmental objectives, as Perit Vella has noted, that there are obviously EU policies that we need to address, EU and regional policies that we need to address, and ensure that we achieve the objectives also of such environmental policies. And with specific reference, maybe the next slide, please. To specific sectors, for example, in terms of fisheries and aquaculture, although this sector is regulated by the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture and not AIRA, however, we need to have a better understanding of or address the impacts that this particular sector can have, for example, on the seabed of the marine environment or on the species through bycatch. And also, for example, in relation to aquaculture, we need to look at water quality. And here there would be the link also with the permitting process that AIRA has in terms of sort of the sustainable practices that can be ensured through such permitting processes. With respect to shipping, we primarily look at the pollution aspect, obviously, both in terms of air quality and in terms of water quality objectives. And this is directly linked also to issues undertaken under the Barcelona Convention, such as, for example, the SECA, the Sulfur Emissions Control Area in the Mediterranean. So we look at, but these are the environmental aspects that we look at.
Mrs. Rizzo, sometimes we are losing you because of the internet connection. So until she connects back up, we'll just wait a couple of seconds, hopefully. Hi, Miren.
Hi, I'm sorry you lost me there.
Yes, yes.
ahead.
Hello. Maybe you can switch off your video to.
Yeah, I will. I'm sorry
Thank
about
you.
this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this is also linked, shipping is also linked to initiatives under the Barcelona Convention, for which ERA is the focal point as well. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Yes, marine litter is a specific aspect which is generally addressed under the blue economic processes because it is linked a lot with economic development. And from our end, there are various objectives that we need to reach in terms of marine litter, particularly objectives that are sort of set by the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is a very wide-ranging directive which includes most of the pressures on the marine environment, and we have to reach set targets and thresholds in this regard. And this is also linked to waste policy, in particular the single-use plastic strategy that ERA has issued in recent years. Next slide, please. Yes, biodiversity and conservation, as most of you are already aware, we have designated marine protected areas, so we need to ensure that we align the economic activity with the site-specific objectives for these particular areas so that we ensure that their conservation is either maintained or enhanced. And then for the wider marine environment beyond the marine protected areas, we also have to adopt an ecosystem-based approach towards the management of anthropogenic activity. And this is in line with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And in fact, we work, in order to implement this directive, we work with most of the sectors. In terms of knowledge, I think in this case, it is a two-way process because from our end, we are bound to continuously actually monitor the status of the marine environment. We have monitoring processes in place. And we have to engage experts to implement such monitoring processes, and this can provide the information required for also blue growth. Now, why is it important for us, how we see this consultation process? It's important because we need to streamline the environmental objectives in the economic sector so that we ensure that they are aligned with our environmental objectives. We also need to ensure the sustainable use of resources so that they're safeguarded in the longer term. We need to ensure again that we achieve the environmental objectives and targets under the environmental policy. And from our end, we can also inform the transition to sustainability. And that's it from my end. Thank you very much, and apologies for my internet connection. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much. We move on to the next speaker. So Mr. Kevin Bohr, CEO of Malta Maritime Forum, and he'll be taking us through the efforts that the MMF do with regards to consultation. Over to you, Kevin.
Hello, good afternoon to everybody. Will someone from your end be sharing my slides, please?
Yes, it's already shared. So
okay, so today I have been asked to go over basically the experience of the Malta Maritime Forum in participating in local and EU consultations, and perhaps highlight the main challenges when it comes to consultations at the local level, challenges that derive from the local scenario, but also the challenges that arise when we deal with wider and more international dimension of consultation that is mainly with the EU, where we are mostly concerned with, not so much the IMO and all the other multilateral bodies that were already mentioned by Perit, Karmenu, Vella. And then I will also try to come up with some solutions and strategies. So if we dive straight into the next slide, I have listed here some of the main challenges, and the main challenge comes from the fragmentation of local associations and bodies that are involved either in the wider scope of representing business, but also in the narrower scope. So zooming down into maritime and then zooming further into associations for bunkering, for yachting, and various other aspects of the maritime world, or indeed the blue economy. So what happens with this? I think we've skipped the slides. There we go. So what happens with this fragmentation? We have multiple associations that rely on each other sometimes. Sometimes there is a consultation that is open, and one association takes a step back because it thinks that other associations are being consulted, because they, at face value, they may seem more relevant, when in fact there would be no consultation with other associations. So certain important dossiers can fall between two stools. What happens also is that when multiple associations are called into action for a certain consultation, then we all start sounding out the same companies for reaction and feedback, and what happens is that we are bombarding the same companies with the same questions and asking for the opinion several times over, and obviously this bothers people and wastes a lot of time of companies and associations, and the next time round the level of feedback that we would obtain would obviously suffer. What happens is that scarce resources become even scarcer. So when we are fragmented, we are already living in a small island with very scarce resources. We are always going around the same people and the same companies for feedback, as I perhaps already hinted. And when we divide them even further into different associations, then the people start becoming more scattered here and there, and it renders our participation and our feedback very problematic. To move over to another challenge, we could mention also the overburdened authorities that we have. We deal directly with Transport Malta, which in itself is a massive entity with very wide-ranging responsibilities. We have excellent people there, and we have Captain Bujaya on the line, who is almost, I can call him superhuman, not because he's here, but we have a very high regard for Captain Bujaya. But then when it comes to Captain Bujaya and his teams within the maritime area of Transport Malta needing to escalate something, either further up Transport Malta, which is obviously responsible for the whole of transport in Malta, and indeed to the ministry, which then is not only responsible only for transport, but also for public works, infrastructure, and what have you, then obviously you need to be a superhuman to be able to deal in detail with a certain focus and with the certain reaction time to certain urgent consultations that are perhaps taking place. And obviously this we find is another challenge. Besides the fact that there are also overlapping responsibilities between authorities and ministries. So as Malta Maritime Forum, we deal mainly with the Ministry for Transport, as I have just mentioned, transport, infrastructure, and capital projects. But it is not rare that we also need to engage with other ministries like energy and environment, finance, the economy, education. So sometimes there are overlapping areas which obviously creates difficulties because there is lack in focus, and we as a Malta Maritime Forum do not have a one-stop shop, so to speak, a go-to ministry or a go-to focused authority that deals solely with maritime issues. If we go to the next slide, here I listed some challenges when it comes to EU consultation. So I don't think it's a very big secret, and perhaps Perit Karmenu Vella will be able to confirm this, but our feeling is that the importance of the maritime industry within the whole of the European Union is underestimated, and perhaps a reason for this is that many countries in the European Union on the continent are landlocked, and they don't give that much importance to the maritime industry. And obviously there we rely on other, well, part of the countries in the European Union that rely rather on the maritime industry, and their certain policies sometimes become problematic to conduct consultation with. Very often there is a similar situation as what happens in Malta. So there is overlapping of responsibilities. There is DG Mare, or there was DG Mare up to the last commission, but the responsibilities of DG Mare we find are very narrow, and indeed I think do not solely safeguard the interests of the maritime industry. So much so, if I can perhaps go back to some experience of a couple of years ago or a year ago, when we were discussing the emission trading system with the Commission, and we knocked on the door of DG Mare in Brussels. As expected, because we already knew, they told us, yes, we are in charge generally of maritime issues, but we are very limited in scope, and we have not been involved in the drawing up of the regulations of the ETS. That was DG Klima, the DG in charge of climate change, and that's where we needed to go to make our representations directly. The same with DG Move, which is also part of the Commission, but deals with transport, and the same with DG Grow, which has to do with the economy. Although there is very efficient internal communication, but sometimes the nature of the consultation, the subject matter of the consultation, does not fit in exactly where the competences actually rely. So we found in DG Klima that their understanding of how the emission trading system was going to impact the maritime system was very poor. The assumptions made were very poor, the calculations made and the preparatory work were indeed very poor, and this led to poor design of the regulations, because when in fact they thought that the measures taken will in fact reduce pollution in the Mediterranean Sea and the European Union, in fact the measures, by their own admission at the end of it, were far from going to reach this objective. I think I have gone through all these points. Some solutions, capacity building, and Perit Karmenu Vella has already alluded to this. So basically, well, actually not capacity building, but the organized and structured consultation meeting. So this is happening. Luckily now, well, it's not just a matter of luck, but it is a matter of work and cooperation and trust and confidence, that associations are coming together to participate in a united front with also with government here, to take on the giant, which is the European Union. So basically, when it comes to dealing with the European Union on matters related to things of strategic importance to the Maltese economy, such as maritime, we need to put on a united front, both as the private sector in a united fashion, and also the public and the private sector, including government, and also the opposition. I need to stress, because this is in the national interest, to pull the same rope. Focused authorities, as I have already hinted, and it's no secret that the policy of the Malta Maritime Forum is for Malta to have a dedicated entity for the maritime affairs, which would be autonomous from other forms of transport and regulators that deal with aviation and road. And this is to ensure that we have focus and quickness of the mark. One final solution would be to have a strategy, and the MMF has welcomed the recent opening of consultation process towards a maritime transport strategy in Malta. This was announced by Minister Chris Bonnet on World Maritime Day, in fact, last September. And we see the strategy as a business plan for the country when it comes to the maritime industry. Obviously, every company operates according to a business plan, and we see that as a sector and as an industry, we also need to have a business plan with clear targets and a clear direction for all stakeholders to understand where to channel their resources and what KPIs and targets are there for the taking. Obviously, a strategy will identify all the roles that each player in the industry, whether it is regulatory or whether it is commercial or whether it is like the MMF, an institutional player, all the roles are well defined so that there is no overlap, no confusion as much as possible, and that there is effective leadership. All this obviously strengthens Malta's negotiating powers when it comes again to dealing with the large entity, the ultimate policymaker in Europe, which is the European Union, and obviously where you are taking on the interests of all the other member states collected into one economic bloc and one body. So with that in mind, I have given or tried to give some solutions to the challenges that we meet on a day-to-day basis in participating in local and European consultation process as MMF. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions later on.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was very fruitful indeed. So I now welcome Captain David Bugeja. He doesn't really need an introduction in our industry, come on. Former Harbour Master and now Chief Officer Maritime Affairs at Transport Malta. Despite increasing global focus on the blue economy, many people, even within the relevant sectors, still struggle to fully understand what it entails. So how do you think Malta can improve awareness and communication about the blue economy's significance, particularly among stakeholders who are not directly involved in the maritime industry? I leave it up to you, Captain Bugeja.
Well, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. I think it's an excellent initiative. Well, first and foremost, I fully concur what previous speakers have mentioned. My first take on the blue economy is, as I'm sure you are all aware, the multitude of definitions that exist. And I think in our case, and for the sake of having with us the former Minister for DG Mare, I think we need to focus on the European definition, which incidentally talks about all economic activities, but not use. And that for me is something which we should be thinking about, in the sense that this EU definition talks about economic activities in their wider scope. And as mentioned, we are an island state. So really, how can we really consult with all those involved in economic activities that therefore are affecting our blue economy? Why do I say this? Because it is very wide in scope. It is very wide in scope, from a water sports operator to a restaurant serving food and drinks on a beach, where the use seems to not be mentioned. So the economic activity needs better self-regulation. We talk a lot about shipping and ports, and as you know, shipping and ports are very much close to me. And why do I say this? Because when we talk about this blue economy, we should not lose sight of the importance of the shipping and maritime sector. Ports exist because they serve ships. Ships exist because they are the backbone of world trade and prosperity, including something that is a very important goal, the eradication of poverty. So when we talk about blue economy, we cannot not give shipping and ports a priority. Both shipping and ports today are heavily regulated, at all levels, at monitoring, at inspections. So in respect of this consultation and in respect of the economy, what I would like to see is more focus on the land-based impact on the blue economy. We know that one of the biggest problems is marine litter. It is originating mainly from land. Ships today are now disciplined. We also manage our ballast water, which is pure seawater. We have the latest technology in scrubbers, ports have environmental management systems and water containment. So in my opinion, with blue economy and the wider scope is to really engage those players that may be not on the front line, but on the sideline, that are as relevant as those on the main line. The other small thing, because otherwise I'll keep on going, is that when we talk about consultation and the stakeholders, Kevin is representing the forum. Indeed, it is a maritime forum. However, unfortunately, there are still entities that opt to stand alone rather than joining forces with the forum for one voice. And this, it would also benefit if Malta has a stronger one voice rather than a lot of fragmentation with other sources. Because, for example, we know the aquaculture sector, which is very strong and influential, has its independent voice. Even, for example, when we talk about the cruise industry, within the forum, let's say the main representation is the cruise terminal, and maybe some efforts will be making. But then when it talks about the passenger aspect and the aspect of the land-related impact on cruise, it may not be there. So I think in the wider consultation, we need to really understand, all the economic activities and all the players to be involved, and all have a role in self-regulating.
Thank you so much, Captain Bugeja, for your intervention. I think there were very good observations. So, any comments from the previous speakers on this overall presentation that you want to add, or shall I just dig in with some questions I have prepared? Okay. So the first question is targeted to Perit, Karmenu, Vella. Are there specific regulations you believe need revision? So are there any regulations that will actually Malta needs in terms of change and or introduction to promote sustainable blue economic growth?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pauline. And I think that change, revisions, reviews, they are very, very important. Why? Because the economic, social, and environmental factors affecting our policies and implementation are continuously changing, and regulations must also be changed accordingly, not just to keep pace with the dynamic realities, but also in anticipation of future changes as well. As I said earlier on, most of the policies at international levels are usually revised at that level, and then any revisions taking place at that level are transposed into national legislation. And as an EU member state, we don't only transpose the EU directives, but we also have to transpose any revisions happening thereafter. As a rule, EU directives are always meant to be revisited and reviewed periodically. Every time that the European Union comes up with a set of regulations, it is stipulated in those same regulations that these regulations will have to be reviewed, some within 3 years period, some within a 5-year period, and so on. But I think what is important that we review is not the policies or the objectives, but the implementation measures that will have to take us to those objectives. Why am I saying this? Because very often directives remain the same. Those directives are not being achieved. So we have to change the measures we have put in place to achieve those directives, either to make them more ambitious, mostly to make these measures more ambitious, especially when we can gauge that progress is not happening at all. Just to give you an example, I mentioned earlier on the Common Fisheries Policy. The Common Fisheries Policy is revised every 10 years. So one commission revises it, the next commission does not, and the commission after that revises it. However, the measures that come out of the Common Fisheries Policy are changed and revised every year. Every year, the Common Fishery Policy gives measures, quotas to fishermen for different stocks on an annual basis. So the policy remains there, but the measures change more frequently. Transposition of policies is important. It is very important, even the transposition of the revisions, but that does not mean anything unless the implementation is there. Every now and then, some member states, they are penalized because either they don't transpose or they transpose but not the right transposition. But most of them are penalized because even though they have transposed the directives, they are not implementing those directives. And I think, in my opinion, we have to continuously assess the progress and revise our action plan, even at a national level. This doesn't have to happen at the European level. The regulations that need periodically to be changed and reviewed, let's take the maritime spatial planning. If we are talking about new marine and maritime activities coming on place due to the blue economy, then obviously there is going to be more competition for the same limited space in our seas. And that is where the maritime spatial planning has got to keep on updating, because especially in Malta, we have tried, for example, to find and allocate a space in the sea, near shore or offshore, to accommodate a maritime and a marine laboratory platform. It has been a nightmare to try and identify the right place. without conflicting with other demands from other sectors. And even here, I think we have to revise some legislation when it comes to allocation of space. If an industry requests a space to be allocated on land, then we have the lands department, we have the rules, and that is easily tackled. But if an operator asks for an area at sea, then we don't have the right mechanism in place as we have for the land. Finance, one of the barriers to the blue economy is for startups especially to have access to finance. Why? Unfortunately, our banks have a good knowledge of the real estate business, but we are treading into new waters, into new areas when it comes to the blue economy. And commercial banks, not just in Malta, but all over Europe, they tend to shy away from financing blue economy projects because they don't understand it. They think there's a higher risk than a land-based economy. So we have to review our banking policies in Malta as well. Greening existing blue economy sectors has already been mentioned by Kevin and by David. Obviously, we have to start updating, upgrading, and greening our ports to accommodate new demands and new technology and new operations and activities. Okay, we talk about the shore to ship, but then we have to also include to green the ports, waste reception facilities. If we want our ships to decarbonize, we need to make certain that our ports have storage and supply facilities of alternative fuels and so on. Education. Again, we are very often talking about our educational system. Do we have enough ocean literacy? About a year ago, I had some meetings with the Minister for Education, and he totally accepted to introduce the ocean literacy curriculum in our junior schools. This is something that UNESCO is obliging all its countries to do by the year 2030. I think all of the schools in countries joining UNESCO will have to provide an ocean literacy curriculum. But then at a higher level, we need to make certain that our university, our MCAST, and alongside with MaritimeMT, who are doing a very good job, we have to make certain that the skills that the new blue economy demands are there. Otherwise, if we are dreaming about a blue economy and then we don't have the financial support and then we don't have the educational support, then we are going to keep on turning in circles. And to be honest, when we talk about ocean literacy, I think ocean literacy is not educating our young children all about the blue economy. I think we have to educate our senior citizens, we have to educate our senior politicians, ministers, what the blue economy is all about, because the more they understand it, the more supportive they will be. I think consultation is there, but consultation, there's always room for improvement. And when I talk about consultation, it's not public-private consultation, but consultation within interministerial consultations and even between different parties from the private sector. Because at the end of the day, unless we plan for not just a blue economy, but a sustainable blue economy, we will be risking that one activity might be impacting negatively other activities. So we have to make certain, and we have to have a holistic approach toward the future sustainable blue economy.
Thank you so much. We heard a lot about stakeholders coming together, the issue of fragmentation. Kevin, you also mentioned in your presentation capacity and alliance building. I like to come directly to the question, like, okay, everyone speaks of we need fragmentation to stop. We need to work together. But as Captain Bujay was saying, there's different types of associations. In your opinion, Kevin, who should be the owner of this capacity building and this alliance building? I do believe that someone needs to take ownership and responsibility, because we can go on forever speaking about this because no one likes fragmentation. But then again, there are organizations who opt out of being part of the Malta Maritime Forum or involve themselves. Is it the industry that should take this ownership? Is it the authorities that should take this ownership, or government? Or is it the Maritime Cluster, Malta Maritime Forum, there's something that should be doing and it's not doing it yet because it has other challenges?
Pauline, you're asking a very good question to a very biased person. So I dare not give you the answer. Obviously, we believe that the Malta Maritime Forum is the national cluster, and it is widely regarded as so by the authorities. And we have regular meetings with the ministry concerned, and it is not just the present minister, but for successive ministers. We have been having regular meetings. We have regular meetings with the authority, as Captain Bujaya can attest, and this is not just now, but ever since the early days of the Maritime Forum when I was not around. Perit, Karmenu, Vella can also attest to the fact that we bring to the table, especially now that the consultation started on the national maritime transport, and we are very much engaged in supporting this idea. However, we as Maritime Forum cannot stop the creation of new associations. I mean, we cannot stop that, and if new associations start mushrooming and start asking for meetings, and start sending policy documents to the authorities, we cannot stop that. So what we do is that we try, as we all know on this call, and we are very active in what we do, and we not only hold regular meetings with the powers that be, but also we have consultation meetings ourselves, consultation meetings that are very often addressed, and where Perit, Vella and Captain Bujaya also participate very actively to give their views, and we have all the industry there. And I think we cannot be doing much more than we do in that area. Perhaps, and I tried to tie it in, but I did not give it enough focus in my presentation, is capacity building. So we all know how difficult financially it is to run these types of associations. And access to finance to help you build capacity is not very easy. In fact, since I've been at the forum these past 3 or 4 years, for example, we have tried to partner in EU-funded projects for capacity building. I can remember of the CAF around 5 projects with international partners, and they have been very time consuming, as you know, to put together. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, either because the budgets would have been taken up, or because the matter at stake would not have been a big priority for the Commission at that certain point in time, we have not been successful in tapping useful funds to help us in building capacity and helping us in the reach out and in managing to communicate better with the authorities, both in terms of policy papers, but also in terms of traveling abroad and knocking on doors with members of the European Parliament and members of the Commission. All this is very hard when you are trying to operate on a very limited budget, as you will all appreciate.
Thank you so much. Captain Bujaya, would you like to give me a bit your idea on, like you mentioned, fragmentation? Who should take the ownership to reduce this? Let's say, who, in your opinion, which stakeholder should be the owner and should be responsible? Because we've been discussing this for quite some time, and we need to make sure the inclusivity and an impactful dialogue for Malta. So, what's your 2 cents on this?
Well, the first comment is to build up also on what Kevin said. The representation needs to have competence and expertise. So when we are consulting with an entity, while I appreciate the difficulty of capacity building, however, to make it, quite blunt, industry representation needs to put their socks up, in the sense that if you are representing an industry with a significant turnover, then they have to be expected to contribute through a membership subscription, so that that particular entity has a professional secretariat. As a lot of you know, I have experiences not only in Malta. I work closely with EU institutions. I work with institutions in other countries where their maritime sector, in terms of numbers, are even smaller than ours. And their organizational setup is much more professional, with permanent secretariat on a salary. So my first appeal is that the industry representation needs to find internally the funds to have a professional setup. Kevin is here representing the forum. Like me, he cannot make miracles. He needs, technical support, so that when they are preparing and making a submission, the industry is not only creating concerns, but is providing, solutions, and also being realistic. Because if there is legislation and if there's something that we don't like, but we know it's going to happen, then the last thing we need to do is keep lamenting but not prepare for it. That, in my opinion, is the first point, that the consultation with the industry stakeholders needs to be well prepared and very well organized in terms of capacity building. The same applies with government. When we're talking about consultation with blue economy, I think at government level, the policies need to be very clear. And I think we are at a stage where, whether we like it or not, we have to become selective. We cannot expect our ports to keep growing if we're not interested in port expansion plans. We cannot expect to remain an international flag if we're not going to invest in capacity building, in training. We have activities that are very well outside our comfort zone and our control. Most of our businesses in Malta, in the shipping, they are value added. Our domestic shipping is a very small percentage. When we talk about our Freeport operation, more than 90% is pure transshipment, very volatile and very sensitive. So in our policies, we need to be very clear what we want, to recognize the value-added employment and benefits that the industry is saying, and priorities need to be set, both at government level and industry level. And then I think we can have a fruitful debate.
Thank you so much. And also, we may be adding to that, like, is there a list? Is there like a contact list that each time a consultation is due? How is the government making sure that it's reaching everyone?
A very interesting question. I don't believe we have a consolidated list. We just talk to each other, try to remember. It's like when we are extending invites for a conference. Again, where do you start and where do you stop? Because we know that there are a number of organizations, be it small or big. Some may be much more relevant than a big organization in a very specific discussion. So if, for example, you are discussing, let's say coastal tourism as distinct from the cruise liner industry, but coastal tourism, small craft, then maybe within the forum, there isn't the real representation, So then we need to source out the right entity that has that representation. And so there isn't a fine line. I think it's works in progress, Pauline.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that makes up our time. So, I mean, it was very interesting for me, and I think this knowledge is very important for all major stakeholders in the industry. Thank you so much for all the speakers, and I think it was a very fruitful discussion. I just need everyone, there's a link to the survey in the chat, so maybe we just can allow a couple of 2 minutes max to fill in a survey. It would be good for us to know how it all went. I hope it was useful as much as it was useful for me and the rest of the team. Thank you all so much, and I hope we'll meet again very soon. Cheers. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.